The knees. It was worth it. Have a nice day. Take care. Bye. So I am here outside 251 Menlove Avenue, the childhood home of John Lennon. Did you know on John's birthday, which is the 9th of October, they leave the light on in his bedroom overnight? I think that's a really nice gesture, is it not? I can't get close to the plaque, but English Heritage, blue plaque here, says John Lennon, 1940 to 1980, musician and songwriter, lived here 1945 to 1963. John lived here with his Aunt Mimi Smith. John lived with his Aunt Mimi after she made numerous complaints to Liverpool Social Services about her younger sister, Julia Lennon, who was John's mum, and eventually Julia surrendered the care of his son John to Mimi when he was just 5 years old, for various reasons, but mainly Julia did have her personal issues. Now, just get everyone off the camera. Now, on the 15th of July 1958, I've just been speaking to the lady who takes the tours around John Lennon's house, and she informed me that Julia Lennon left her sister's home back there where we can see the people entering, and she walked along Menlove Avenue. Her sister Mimi was still outside watching her walk along here, and somewhere along round about here, nobody knows exactly the exact location. People claim they do, but only Aunt Mimi will know, and she never revealed it. But it was somewhere along Vale Road here that Julia crossed over and wants to get to that bus stop over there where John would also get the bus, and she was struck by a car driven by a off-duty policeman, Eric Clegg. Now, John was only 17 years old, and obviously was traumatised by her death. And even though they didn't live together, Julia shared John's passion for music and taught him how to play the banjo. She bought him his first guitar, and all this, by the way, was against his Aunt Mimi's wishes. She wanted him to quit music and concentrate on his education. But listen, you can really hear and feel John's pain in losing his mother in his song he wrote about her called Mother. If that doesn't bring a tear to your eye, then I think you've got a swinging brick as a heart. But you could also argue that the loss of his mother actually brought Lennon and McCartney closer, as Paul lost his mother when he was just 14. So I want to walk from John Lennon's childhood home and the route he'd take to Paul McCartney's childhood home, and along the way I'd like to talk about the relationship between the two of the biggest ever singer-songwriters, Lennon and McCartney. So follow me and follow John Lennon's footsteps along the long and winding road that leads to Paul's door. So I was recently in America, New York to be precise, and whenever I would speak to a Yank and tell them where I was from, just the road quickly, I would tell them that I was from Liverpool, their first response would be, "Oh yeah, the Beatles." And it really got me thinking of, even after 55 years since the band ceased, the impact that they had on putting Liverpool on the map and significantly impacted the city by boosting its economy and attracting tourism, as we can see over there. So much so that 2 million visitors a year say they visited Liverpool purely because of the Beatles, bringing in an estimated £82 million annually to the Liverpool economy, and has created over 2,000 jobs. Now I am going along the wrong path already. Apologies. Now, whilst in New York, I very morbidly wanted to see where John Lennon was murdered. I wanted to see the Dakota apartment building where he lived with Yoko. Now when I got to Central Park where John was murdered, there was a singer, and I'll play that clip here.
Thank you, John. I'm sure it feels.
Now he just finished one of probably my favourite songs by Lennon, which we will all know, Imagine. And it was a real profound moment that inspired me to make this video today. And as I say, I want to talk about John and Paul's relationship along the way. And if you look closely, here comes the sun. Apologies again, apologies. So John would walk along here, and the shortcut that he would take would be this public footpath. Now this footpath runs through Allerton Golf Course, and it obviously provided the ideal shortcut for the pair to travel between each other's homes. And I've just been told also by the guide that John would cut through here to visit his mum before her eventual death also. Now there's a couple of people in front of me, so I'm just gonna I'll carry on. I don't really like getting people on in case they don't want to be on camera. But yeah, it was probably just as overgrown back in the late 50s, early 60s when they would make this route. Now on nights when, I'm just going to turn the camera so I don't get people on nights when the playing ran a little late, they would sneak over the fence hoping to avoid the attention of the course's night guard. Apparently, little did they realise at the time, but those would have become the most famous footsteps to ever grace Allerton Golf Course. There are houses here on my right, but I do have to avoid being hit by a golf ball also. But here I am, following them steps many years later. So we just walked past them. There's a bit of a obscure, and there wouldn't have been any street lights like there is here now. It would have been very dark. It's funny, they must have cut through this golf course hundreds of times, yet neither John or Paul ever caught the golf bug. Now, I did, and I started here in Allerton Golf Course, played here probably once a week or once a fortnight maybe for a while with a gentleman that is no longer with us. He died about 12 years ago, and I've never played this course since. Now it might get a bit dark down here. I don't really want to cut the video too much because I do want to show you the the whole track. Now there's people coming towards me, so I will have to step in, and I will pause the video when I step in. There's a bike. But we'll talk about John and Paul's relationship. Together, John Lennon and Paul McCartney created a history that transcended the music industry, and it was fate that brought their union, leading to a brotherly bond, you could say, that gifted the world with a catalogue of songs that remain culturally vital over 60 years later. But what makes that first meeting so momentous wasn't just that they met, but the how and why. You see, just after Paul's 15th birthday, he was invited by his school friend Ivy Vaughan, to go and watch his friend John's band, the Quarrymen, play at the local church fete, to which, obviously, thankfully, Paul agreed. Now, when they arrived, Paul was immediately intrigued by John, later describing how great he looked, praising him on his musical talents, and also mentioned that he liked the fact that John had a bit of an attitude. And we're still going through the golf course, as you can see there. And Paul waited and bided his time before eventually plucking up the courage to ask John, who would have been a couple of years older, like he would have been 17. So that it must have took some courage to ask for a go on his guitar. But thankfully John accepted, and then watched as the feeling was mutual, admiring Paul, who confidently, cheekily retuned it, turning it upside to as to play left-handed, and treated John to a virtuoso performance of the hit 20 Flight Rock, which some of you may remember. I can't remember, was it Eddie Cochran, was it? I can't remember the artist, I apologise. But all this took place in the summer of 1957, I think it was July, at St. Peter's Church Hall. And it's quite difficult to think of a more un-rock and roll location than a church. But it was the spark that reshaped popular music forever, wasn't it? And if you'd like me to do a video there where this took place, let me know in the comments. I tell you what, it's a beautiful walk. Could you imagine, excuse the pun again, but could you imagine if John Lennon had lived? Of course, his legacy would certainly continue to evolve. Potentially there may have been new musical collaborations, maybe with Paul, even maybe artists of today. Paul's done it, hasn't he? Quite recently done one with was it Kanye West, I think, and Rihanna. I say recently, it was a few years ago. But yeah, imagine who John would have collaborated with. It would have been interesting. But I wonder what he'd think of Liverpool today also. No doubt he'd have continued to focus on peace and social activism, because as well as his music, Lennon became equally regarded for his hot takes on politics, religion, and even his own bandmates. Because though he was a symbol of peace and love, he was no saint, was he? And was prone to violent outbursts in his younger years. But listen, it's quite understandable, isn't it, when I have to be quiet. We do have golfers just through there. Don't want to be the reason to put them off. Now this path splits into two. Sorry mate, I won't get you on. This path splits right and left, and we're going to go left to continue following John's footsteps. But yeah, about John's temper, you know, when you look at his life, it is quite understandable really, when, don't forget, he was born in 1940 when German bombs rained down on Liverpool, then blaming himself for his own mother not being able to raise him, then taken away from her at such a young age. Hiya mate, you okay? Yeah, you could say his life was quite remarkable, if not controversial, from day one. Now, it's no secret that there was a public estrangement between John and Paul that occurred after the Beatles breakup. You know, there were diss tracks, and they made direct attacks on each other, and some interviews with critical statements. But there was a period of reconciliation before Lennon's death, and once again the path splits, but we stay on the public footpath and we go left to follow John's footsteps. Now, as I say, there was a bit of an estrangement between the pair, and there was a reconciliation before Lennon's tragic death, which was, what was it, 1980, wasn't it? In fact, just 2 days before his death, John had a 3-hour conversation for an interview with the BBC's Andy Peebles, and obviously a couple of days later John had died, and surprisingly Paul reached out to the interviewer Andy because he wanted information regarding Lennon's feelings towards Paul. Now, McCartney was clearly grieving, and in the midst of his pain he needed answers to allow his mind to rest. Yeah, they've done this golf course up, by the way. It's really a lovely course now. As I say, I haven't played here in over 12 years. But it's nice to know that despite everything they'd said about each other, and the tracks that they released about each other, Andy reassured Paul that after speaking in length with John, that there was absolutely no doubting his fondness of Paul, only exhibiting love for his former bandmate. And it was the reassurance of John's love that Paul needed, and he got. The Beatles did do some photo shoots on here also. If I can find pictures, I will try and overlay them. Now, between this meeting also, I think it's very important to mention that Paul became very emotional. You know, ever since losing their mothers so young, they were kindred spirits, you could say, who knew each other better than they probably ever knew themselves. You know, that Lennon and McCartney had that unbreakable bond. And the loss of Lennon will never leave McCartney, and the pain of his death in such a cruel manner is obviously impossible to grieve fully. However, Lennon's interview proved to be what McCartney desperately needed to hear. It certainly would have devastated them to know that Lennon still held a grudge, wouldn't it? But I don't. Shall we go there? I mean, we can talk about John and Yoko's interesting relationship, can't we? We could talk all day about that. And I say interesting because she's often seen as the divisive force in the Beatles' history, you know, and many blaming the band's breakup on her presence and her strong manipulative influence over John. And I remember someone saying, generally it's accepted that love is blind, but thanks to John Lennon we know it is also deaf. But listen, everyone's got their own opinion on Yoko and the relationship between her and John. But, you know, Paul was always and still is remarkably grateful about Yoko. Or more graceful than grateful, maybe, you know, and I just think that shows what a real class guy, a real classy man he is. I think, you know, Paul had an insane. He was an insane observational writer, wasn't he? And whereas John was a great introspective writer, but it worked. Obviously, it worked, and I think it's absolutely amazing that 4 people in the same community. You know, if you think about that, 4 people from the same area, and they created the greatest band that ever lived. Some of these houses, by the way, are unbelievable. But here we are now on Forthlin Road, and he would have gone left down here. It's interesting, isn't it, that obviously Paul clearly had no trouble making it on his own musically, but personally he took the breakup the hardest. You know, if you watch interviews and even now, you know, you could see that Paul was the one that took it hardest the most, wasn't he? By the way, this is such a beautiful walk, isn't it? No wonder the pair made such beautiful music together. But the Beatles story was no romantic overnight sensation. In these early years, slogging it desperately to try and get a break, John would often try and raise the group's spirits, and he'd often shout at them, "Where are we going?" to where they would shout back all the way to the top. Little did they realise at the time that they would. But this walk is so nice. And he would turn down the next right, so I'm going to cross over when this car goes past. And he would eventually turn right down Cleveley Road. And here we go. Now, Cleveley Road is it's a really nice, expensive road. These houses, I mean, they're lovely houses. I suppose you're paying more for the area because you'd need some money to live here. They go for just a little over £500,000. But even with all that money, still can't buy me love. Again, sorry. But yeah, they are some lovely houses. So yeah, John would walk along here, and this is probably, we're probably past the halfway point now. So I may speed this bit up. So peaceful, so quiet. You can imagine, again, no pun intended, but walking down here, taking all this in. Obviously there wouldn't have been all these cars, but it would have been very peaceful. And John's thoughts as he's walking down here to either Paul's or his mother's house. You know, you could, he's probably thinking of songs in his head as he's walking down here, wasn't he? Now, I've took the Lennon to McCartney walk rather than McCartney to Lennon because it's McCartney's home, childhood home, which is labelled the birthplace of the Beatles, and this is where Paul and John wrote many of their hits, and yeah, I thought I'd follow the route John would take to get to Paul's, where, as I say, Paul's home was known as the birthplace of the Beatles. So that's why I've done it this way round, and not Paul to John's. Alright. Some people look at you like a complete and utter weirdo when you walk around with a camera. So we're at the end of Cleveley Road, and we would take a left now. And I don't know whether these buses are for McCartney's home, because it's just along here. So we'll cross over. As you can see, I think they are tour buses, and the bus 1, bus 2. They obviously rake in a lot of money for Liverpool. So the Beatles, even after 60 years, still raking in the money for Liverpool. So Forthlin Road is just on our right now. Give peace a chance in the Ukraine colours there. So here we are along Forthlin Road, known as the birthplace of the Beatles, and as we head towards number 20, and these were built in 1949, and Paul's house was a council house, unlike John's, and whereas John's had a blue plaque at the front, Paul's doesn't, mainly because he's still alive. But again, look at the tourism that it brings. I don't know if you can see the crowd down there outside Paul's house. Now, if you would like me to do a video inside, I mean, you can't film actually inside, but you know, I could probably get a few pictures inside both houses. We could possibly do that. Oh yeah, look at the. Now this is an early Saturday morning, and look what it's doing for our city. It's unbelievable. Oh, getting the plaque on. Sorry. So here we are, the birthplace of the Beatles. this is where Paul and John wrote many of their songs. That was the route John would have took. I hope you all enjoyed that, and thank you very much if you made it this far. Hello, goodbye. The proud home of the McCartney family: Jim, Mary, Paul and Mike. And I've come at a very busy time.